"I'll take everything from you," my husband said, right there in the courthouse hallway, as if the marble walls and echoing footsteps were his private stage. Kevin Bennett leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne, sharp, expensive, the kind that lingers after a man has already walked past you. His smile wasn't hopeful. It was certain, like the ending had been decided long ago. Behind him stood Sophie Lane. "You live long enough, you learn to read a room quickly." Sophie wasn't just a bystander, she was part of his performance, his assistant, his lover, his proof that he'd moved on while I was still stuck. She held her chin a little too high, the way younger women sometimes do when they think confidence is something you can put on. On her wrist, a bracelet caught the courthouse light and flashed. I knew that bracelet because I'd seen the number first. $5,000, neat and clean on a receipt Kevin never meant for me to find. Money he assumed I would never trace. People streamed past us, lawyers, bailiffs, couples with red eyes, each carrying their own heavy story. No one paid attention to the small war unfolding between the three of us. Kevin straightened his jacket like he was preparing for a photograph. "You're going to walk out of this with nothing," he said, lowering his voice, savoring it. The house, the accounts, the retirement, everything. He watched my face the way a man watches a card table. He wanted flinching. He wanted begging. He wanted proof that I was already defeated. I didn't give him that. I stood there with my hands folded, the way my mother taught me to stand in church when the sermon cut close to the bone. My heart was steady, not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear had already done its worst in private. By the time we reached the courthouse, it had nowhere left to surprise me. Sophie shifted her weight and crossed her arms, making sure the bracelet showed again. Her eyes flicked over me as if I were something old-fashioned. That was when my attorney, Harold Whitman, stepped in beside me. Mr. Whitman wasn't flashy. He didn't speak loudly. He had the quiet confidence of someone who has watched 100 people walk in certain of victory, only to leave humbled. He looked at Kevin once, just once, then turned to me. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, "are you ready?" I lifted my eyes and met Kevin's stare for the first time that morning. "Yes," I answered, "exactly as you asked." Mr. Whitman nodded, then so softly only I could hear, he added, "Today will be educational." Kevin chuckled like he'd heard a joke. He had no idea who was about to learn what. If you're wondering how a marriage ends in a hallway like that, with a threat spoken like a verdict, let me tell you what I learned the hard way. Most endings don't begin with shouting. They begin with small dismissals. You wouldn't understand. Leave it to me. Don't worry your head about it. A wife becomes background, useful and quiet. That's how Kevin had always tried to see me. I'm Laura Bennett. I've never been the kind of woman who fills a room with noise. I fill it with order. For most of my life, I worked as an accountant. People like to tease about spreadsheets until the day they need someone to tell them the truth. Numbers don't flatter. They don't pretend. They simply add up. Kevin didn't marry me for my love of truth. He married me because I was steady. When we met, he was charming in that practiced way some men have. He remembered names. He knew how to make a table laugh. He carried himself like a man headed somewhere bigger, and I believed him. I believed the hand on my back at parties meant, we're in this together. Over the years, as his career grew, he learned a different kind of confidence, the kind that comes from being praised so often you start to confuse praise with character. He liked being admired, and gradually, without ever announcing it, he began to treat my quietness as weakness. At home, I was the one who paid attention to details. I kept the calendar. I read the statements. I made sure the mortgage and taxes were handled. Kevin liked to tell people he handled everything. He'd say it over dinner, in front of friends. "Laura doesn't worry about money. That's my job." People would laugh and I would smile politely because correcting your husband in public can feel like lighting a match in a dry room. What they didn't see was me at the kitchen table, late at night, sorting through receipts and numbers, steadying the life he claimed to control. Kevin saw those moments too, but he didn't really look. To him, I was simply doing what wives do, keeping things tidy so the man can feel large. And then Sophie arrived. At first, she was just a name. "New assistant," he said. "Smart. Organized." I didn't think much of it. Offices are full of assistants. Life goes on. But patterns change when the truth is trying to surface. Late meetings became routine. His phone turned face down. The laughter he used to bring home started to live somewhere else. He came back smelling of restaurants we never went to anymore, and quiet Laura, background Laura, began to notice what I always notice. Because that's the thing about women like me. We may not shout, we may not slam doors, but we pay attention. By the time Kevin stood in that courthouse hallway and told me he'd take everything, he truly believed I didn't see him clearly. He thought my calm meant I didn't understand the game. What Kevin didn't understand was that I had stopped listening to his promises a long time ago. I had started listening to the numbers. And numbers, like the truth, have a way of catching up to you, especially when you've been careless enough to leave a trail. When you've been married a long time, the world starts to treat your marriage like furniture. Something solid, something that will always be in the corner of the room. People stop asking how you're really doing. They say things like, "You two are doing great." The way they might say, "This house has good bones." I used to nod along. I used to smile at church gatherings and family dinners and those holiday parties where everyone pretends not to notice how tired you look. But inside my own home, the bones were cracking. Kevin and I didn't fall apart in a single moment. We unraveled the way an old sweater does, one loose thread, then another, until one day you look down and realize the whole thing is coming undone in your hands. Early on, Kevin was generous in a way that felt romantic. He brought me flowers on random Tuesdays. He'd put his arm around my shoulder in public and speak about me as if I were the best thing that had ever happened to him. I believed him. I believed in him. And I believed that being steady and loyal would always be enough. I'd been raised to think a good woman builds a home, even if she has to do it quietly. My mother used to say, "You don't need to be loud to be strong." She wasn't wrong. She just never warned me about the kind of man who mistakes a quiet woman for an easy one. As Kevin's career moved upward, his sense of entitlement moved right along with it. He began to treat our life like it was his achievement, his reward. I started hearing phrases that made my stomach tighten even though I couldn't have explained why at the time. "Don't worry about it," he'd say when I asked about a charge on the credit card. "I've got it handled," when I mentioned the mortgage statement. You wouldn't understand when I asked why we were suddenly dining out so much. That last one is a special kind of insult because it's delivered like concern, like he was protecting me from the stress of being informed about my own life. And because I didn't want to fight, because I didn't want to be difficult, I let it slide at first. I focused on what I could control. I kept working. I kept the household running. I wasn't some helpless wife sitting at home hoping my husband would be kind enough to pay the bills. I had my own income, my own professional reputation. Accounting is not glamorous, but it is honest work. It is the work of keeping things real. I did taxes for small businesses, helped families plan for retirement, and watched more people than you'd think quietly panic over money they didn't want anyone to know they'd lost. I'd seen all the ways people lie to themselves. I'd seen all the ways they hide what they're ashamed of. But I didn't realize at first that my own husband was becoming one of those people. Kevin liked to look successful. He liked the appearance of control. If we were at a dinner party and someone mentioned investments or promotions, Kevin would lean forward, hold court, and act like he was the expert. He'd casually mention our portfolio, our plans, our goals. Everyone would nod, impressed. Then he'd squeeze my hand under the table, hard enough to remind me not to contradict him. Sometimes after we got home, I'd mention something small, a correction, a suggestion, a question. He didn't like that. "You're embarrassing me," he once snapped, standing in our kitchen with the refrigerator door open. "You always have to make me look wrong." That's when I started to understand that Kevin's pride mattered to him more than truth. It's strange to say this now, but I didn't feel the first cracks as anger. I felt them as loneliness. Kevin was physically in the house, but he had begun living in a different emotional world. He ate dinner while staring at his phone. He answered questions like he was answering a stranger. And when I spoke, he listened just enough to decide whether my words were useful to him. I tried to fix it the way many women my age were taught to fix things, with patience, with kindness, with silence. I cooked his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I made small plans for weekends, hoping time together would bring us back. He'd agree, then cancel. Agree, then get called into work. Agree, then show up late, distracted, irritated that I expected him to be present. And then came the stories. At first they were harmless. We're swamped. There's a big project. My assistant is helping me manage the schedule. It was always my assistant, never Sophie, for a while. The name didn't come until later, when Sophie finally did come into our lives as a person, not just a job title. It was in the most humiliating way possible. Kevin invited me to a company event, one of those sleek gatherings at a hotel ballroom where everyone wears name tags and drinks too much watered-down wine. I hadn't wanted to go. I'd been tired, and I'd told him so. "You never support me," he said, like it was a moral failing on my part. So I went. Sophie greeted him like she belonged to him. Not openly, not in a way anyone could accuse her of, but in that subtle way women learn to mark territory without making a scene. She laughed a little too warmly. She touched his arm just a second too long, and when she looked at me, it wasn't with friendliness, it was with assessment. "This is Laura," Kevin said, and there was something in his tone that stung, like he was introducing an old obligation, not a wife. Sophie smiled and said, "Oh, it's so nice to finally meet you." Finally, as if she'd been waiting. All night I watched my husband become a man I didn't recognize. He was energized around her. He was attentive. He was the version of Kevin I'd married, except he was giving that version away to someone else. On the drive home, I said carefully, "She seems very comfortable with you." Kevin's eyes stayed on the road. "Don't start," he said. "I'm not starting anything," I replied. "I'm noticing." He sighed like I was exhausting. "She's young, she's friendly. That's her job." Then he added, without even looking at me, "You're being paranoid." Paranoid. That word can do a lot of damage in a marriage, especially when a woman's instincts are already whispering that something is wrong. It makes you question yourself. It makes you wonder if you're imagining things. But here's the truth. Instinct is not imagination. It's pattern recognition. It's the part of you that keeps count even when your heart wants to believe. And the more Kevin dismissed me, the more I started counting. Small charges appeared on the card that didn't match our life. A little restaurant bill here, a hotel bar tab there, a gift shop purchase that made no sense. I didn't confront him right away. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things. I watched, because I had learned something from years of working with finances. The truth doesn't announce itself. It leaves evidence, quiet, consistent evidence, like footprints in fresh snow. Kevin thought my silence meant surrender. What it really meant was that I was taking notes. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that doesn't feel special until you look back and realize it split your life in two. Rain tapped at the kitchen window in a steady, patient rhythm, like it had all the time in the world. The sky was the color of dishwater. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner because I'd wiped down the counters out of habit, not because anyone was coming over. The washing machine hummed in the next room, turning and turning as if it could rinse away more than stains. Kevin was late again. By then, late had become normal. A marriage can get used to almost anything if you let it. You adjust your dinner. You adjust your sleep. You adjust your expectations until you don't recognize the woman who once waited by the window for headlights to appear in the driveway. That night, I didn't wait by the window. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, listening to the rain and the spin of the washer, and I told myself something I'd been avoiding for months. If a man is always somewhere else, he is choosing not to be here. When Kevin finally came in, he was moving fast, already talking, already creating noise so there wouldn't be room for questions. "Long day," he said, not looking at me. He tossed his keys into the bowl by the door. His phone buzzed and he checked it immediately, thumb flying over the screen. I watched him the way you watch a familiar road when you think the bridge ahead might be out. He shrugged out of his coat and set it over the back of a chair. His suit jacket came next, the expensive one he'd insisted he needed for work. He loosened his tie and headed toward the hallway like the conversation was over before it even began. "Dinner's in the oven," I said. "I ate already," he replied, and for a moment he sounded almost annoyed that I'd tried to feed him. That should have hurt more than it did. The truth is, by then, I was past the point of being shocked by his distance. I was in the stage where a quiet part of you starts asking, "What else don't I know?" Kevin disappeared into the bedroom. I stayed where I was, staring at the jacket draped over the chair. I don't know what made me stand up. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was more like my body moved before my mind caught up. I picked up the suit jacket to hang it properly, another small habit of a wife who keeps the home running even when the home isn't keeping her. My hand slid into the inner pocket, and that's when my fingertips touched paper. A receipt. Thick, smooth, the kind of receipt that comes from a place where they don't apologize for the price. I pulled it out and laid it flat on the table under the warm light of the kitchen lamp. $5,000. It was printed in black ink that looked almost cruel against the white paper. The store name sat at the top like a signature. Below it, the details, date, time, item number, and that total, $5,000, zero. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when you see proof. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of the floor dropping out from under you. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I stared at the number as if I could make it change by refusing to believe it. Kevin had never spent $5,000 on me in one place, not in all our years together, not for an anniversary, not for a milestone birthday, not even when I'd helped him through a job loss early in our marriage and pretended it didn't scare me. But he had spent it. On someone. For something. Recently. I heard the shower start down the hall. Water rushing, a door closing. Kevin sealing himself behind noise so he wouldn't have to face the quiet truth I now held in my hands. I didn't cry. That surprises people when they hear it. They imagine a woman finding proof and collapsing in grief, but grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a stillness so deep you can hear your own thoughts like footsteps. I turned the receipt over. No handwritten note, no explanation, no message to me. Just paper and ink, careless evidence tucked away in a pocket as if he couldn't even be bothered to hide it properly. And then my mind did what it has always done. It went to work. I took a breath. I went to the counter and opened my laptop. The washing machine clicked and continued its steady turn. The rain kept tapping at the window. The world did not stop just because my marriage had started to bleed out. I typed a name I'd heard enough times to know it by heart. Sophie Lane. Her profile came up easily because people like Sophie don't lock their lives away. They display them. They curate them. They treat attention like oxygen. There she was, smiling in bright places, dinners with friends, a picture in front of a mirror, hair perfect, lipstick sharp, a photo of a cocktail with a caption about treating yourself, the kind of lifestyle that looks effortless if you don't know who's paying for it. Then I saw it. A recent post. The date matched the receipt in my hand like two puzzle pieces snapping together. Sophie was sitting in what looked like a restaurant booth, leaning toward the camera, eyes half-lidded with satisfaction. On her wrist was a bracelet, delicate, sparkling, unmistakably new. The caption read something simple, almost playful, but it hit me like a slap. Best night ever. Best night ever. I stared at that picture until the screen blurred, not because of tears, though they were waiting somewhere behind my eyes, but because my body was trying to protect me from what my mind already understood. $5,000, a bracelet, a best night. And my husband coming home late, smelling of places he never took me anymore, telling me I was paranoid for noticing the way my life was shifting. I didn't scroll any further. I didn't need more. When you've balanced enough books in your life, you know when the numbers are undeniable. I closed the laptop gently, as if loud movement might break something fragile. I sat back down at the kitchen table with the receipt in front of me. The tea was still cold, the rain was still steady, the washer was still turning. I thought about my wedding day, about the promises, about the years I'd spent being loyal in quiet ways that don't make for romantic stories, paying bills on time, showing up when his father was sick, being the steady hand in every crisis. And I thought about something else, something less sentimental but more important. I thought about money, not because I loved it, not because I was greedy, but because money tells the truth when people won't. It shows priorities. It shows secrets. It shows betrayal written in neat lines on a statement. I took the receipt and slid it into a folder I kept in the kitchen drawer, the folder where I stored important documents, warranties, and things I might need later. My hands were calm as I did it, but inside, something had changed. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hysteria. It was clarity. I realized in that quiet kitchen on a rainy Tuesday that Kevin wasn't just cheating. He was taking from me, taking resources, taking security, taking a life I had helped build and treating it like his personal bank account. And in that same moment, I made a decision that would eventually bring us to the courthouse hallway where he leaned close and promised he would take everything. I wouldn't confront him yet. I wouldn't give him a warning. I wouldn't cry on demand or beg for decency from a man who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I would do what I have always done. I would gather the facts. I would follow the trail. And when the time came, I would let the truth speak in a language Kevin could not argue with. Numbers. After that Tuesday, I became two women living in the same house. On the outside, I was still the wife who folded towels the way Kevin liked, the woman who remembered birthdays and kept the pantry stocked, the quiet presence people expect to see beside a man who enjoys being seen. I still made coffee in the morning. I still nodded when he spoke, because sometimes the safest way to watch a person is to let them think you are not watching at all. But on the inside, I was the other woman, the one who had stopped asking why and started asking how much, how often, how long. That's the part people rarely understand until they've been through it. Betrayal isn't only an ache in the chest, it's also an accounting problem. It has dates. It has totals. It has patterns that don't lie, even when the person you married does. I didn't begin with drama. I began the way I always begin, with paper. The next morning, after Kevin left for work, kiss on the cheek like he had done nothing wrong, phone already in his hand, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The same kitchen where I'd held that receipt under the lamp. The same chair where I'd sat listening to the washer spin, wondering how many other things had been rinsed out of my life without my consent. I created a new spreadsheet and named it something simple. Household. I didn't call it Kevin or Sophie or affair. I didn't want emotion in the title. I wanted facts. I pulled 3 years of bank statements and credit card records. Some were in a drawer, some were online. Kevin assumed I didn't check anymore because he'd spent years training me, little by little, to trust him and stop worrying. Trust is a beautiful thing in a marriage, but trust without verification is what gets people hurt. I started listing every charge I didn't recognize. Restaurants we didn't go to, hotels I'd never stayed in, gift shops at airports when Kevin had claimed he was local that week, car service rides at odd hours, a boutique purchase that stood out like a bright stain, $5,000, the bracelet. At first it was just a mess of numbers. Then, like always, patterns emerged. Certain charges clustered on the same days, Tuesdays and Thursdays, late afternoons, weekends when Kevin said he was traveling for work. The totals weren't random. They rose and fell like a heartbeat, steady and intentional. I highlighted them in pale yellow. Not bright, not angry, just enough to mark them. My hands were calm, but my body felt strange, like I was watching my life from a distance. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at the screen, not because I didn't understand the math, but because I couldn't understand the audacity. How a man could come home, eat dinner, sleep beside me, and still siphon money away like it was nothing. Then I found the condo. It wasn't a listing on a real estate site, not at first. It was a pattern of payments that didn't match our mortgage. A monthly transfer, same amount, same timing, labeled with an abbreviated name. At first glance, it could have been anything. A loan, an investment, a business expense. Kevin loved vague labels. Vague labels are where secrets hide. So I traced it. I followed the transfer to the payee, then to the account number, then to the bank. I cross-checked with the dates and the amounts. I dug until the pieces began to click together. And then, one afternoon, I logged into our shared documents folder and found it, the paperwork Kevin thought I'd never look at because it was real estate stuff, boring and dense. A deed, a mortgage statement, an address I didn't recognize, a condominium. I sat very still as I read through it, line by line. Kevin's name was there, and the purchase date was there too, right around the time my aunt had passed and left me an inheritance. That inheritance had been one of those bittersweet gifts life hands you. My aunt was the woman who taught me how to make pie crust and how to keep my chin up when men tried to talk over you. Losing her had felt like losing a piece of my foundation. The money she left wasn't fun money. It was security. It was meant for my later years, for medical needs, for peace. I remembered Kevin's voice from that time. "Let me handle the paperwork, Laura. You've been through enough." I had thought he was being kind. Now I understood he was being strategic. The condo wasn't just an affair nest. It was a theft with a roof. A cold wave passed through me, not the kind that makes you shiver, but the kind that makes your stomach drop. I stared at the deed until the words blurred. Then I steadied myself the way older women do, by making tea, by washing a dish, by doing something small and ordinary so the shock doesn't swallow you whole. That night, Kevin came home and complained about traffic. He kissed me lightly. He didn't notice the folder tucked behind the cookbooks on the kitchen shelf. He didn't notice that I had started printing everything. A younger version of me might have confronted him right then, might have thrown the paperwork on the table and demanded answers. But I've lived long enough to know that confrontation often teaches a liar only one thing: how to lie better. So I didn't give him that gift. I kept going. That's when I found the gambling. It wasn't listed as gambling, of course. It never is. It was payment processors, strange abbreviations, transfers that looked like harmless subscriptions if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. There were deposits, hundreds at a time at first, then thousands. Some weeks it was steady. Some weeks it spiked like a man chasing a loss. I recognized the rhythm from my work. I've seen people lose their savings quietly, one just this once at a time. I've seen retirement accounts drained while a spouse thought everything was fine. And here was my own husband doing it under my roof. I sat there in the glow of the laptop screen, thinking about all the times Kevin had told me we needed to tighten the budget, all the times he'd grumbled about expenses as if I were the reason money felt tight, all the times he'd acted like my carefulness was nagging. It hadn't been nagging, it had been instinct. There's a phrase people use now: financial abuse. When I was young, we didn't have that language. We just had women who didn't know the money, and men who handled things. We were taught it was normal. We were taught it was respectful. But what Kevin had been doing wasn't leadership. It was control. And in many places, the law has a name for part of it, too. When one spouse wastes or hides marital money during a marriage, spending on an affair, spending on addictions, that can be treated as a kind of dissipation, a squandering, a theft of shared future. I didn't need the legal terms yet. I just needed the proof. So I built it like I was building a case for an audit, because in a way, that's what it was. I created columns: date, merchant, amount, category, notes. I attached screenshots, I printed statements, I circled receipts, I wrote short explanations in the margins the way I'd done for clients when the IRS wanted clarity. When you do this kind of work, you stop thinking in feelings, you start thinking in timelines. On the timeline, Kevin's story fell apart, and the longer I tracked, the more I realized something else. Kevin wasn't just cheating on me with Sophie. He was cheating on the life we were supposed to be building, the life people our age depend on, retirement, stability, the kind of peace you earn by being careful for decades. He was gambling with my later years as if they were his spare change. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at my own face, the lines around my eyes, the steadiness in them. I thought about all the women I know, friends from church, neighbors, cousins, who have stories they never tell out loud because they were taught to keep the family together, no matter what. I leaned closer and whispered, not to the mirror, but to the woman staring back at me. Not this time. Then I closed the folder, turned off the laptop, and heard Kevin's car pull into the driveway. He walked in smiling, like a man who believed the world still belonged to him. I smiled back, soft and polite, and inside, with every document I'd printed and every number I'd traced, I felt something solid forming. Not revenge, preparation. There's a moment when you've gathered enough truth to fill a folder, when you realize the truth still isn't enough on its own. Facts don't walk into a courtroom and speak for themselves. People do. Lawyers do. And if you choose the wrong one, all your careful work becomes just paper. Paper that can be twisted, dismissed, or buried under somebody else's louder story. I understood that. I had spent my life watching how quickly the truth can be lost in a room full of confidence. So I chose my next step the way I chose everything else, quietly, carefully, and with my eyes open. I didn't tell Kevin I was looking for an attorney. I didn't threaten him. I didn't even hint that I had discovered the condo, the gambling, the gifts. I let him keep believing I was the same Laura he could talk over, the same wife who would be reasonable, the same woman who would accept whatever was decided for her. One morning, after he left for work and the house settled into its daytime silence, I drove across town to a small law office in an older building with narrow windows and a brass directory at the front door. No bright banners, no slick slogans. The kind of place you might walk past 100 times and never notice. The sign on the door read, Harold Whitman, Attorney at Law. I found his name the old-fashioned way, through a woman at my church who had gone through a divorce 10 years earlier. She didn't gossip, not even when she had a right to. But when I asked her quietly who had helped her, she said, Mr. Whitman, he doesn't promise miracles, he just knows how to make the truth unavoidable. That was what I needed. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of paper and furniture polish. There were framed certificates on the wall, but nothing about them felt like bragging. The receptionist offered me water and spoke to me the way people speak to someone they sense is carrying something heavy. When Mr. Whitman came out, he looked exactly like his office. Solid, understated, built for endurance. He was in his 60s, maybe older. His suit wasn't new, but it fit him well, like it had been chosen for function rather than flash. He shook my hand, steady and polite. Mrs. Bennett, he said, please come in. His office was quiet. Law books lined one wall. A small lamp threw warm light over a desk that held neatly stacked files. Nothing about the room invited drama. It invited clarity. He waited until I sat down, then asked, How can I help you today? I didn't start with feelings. I didn't say, My husband is breaking my heart. I said the truth as I understood it. My husband is moving money, I told him. And I believe he has used my inheritance to purchase a property. I believe there's also gambling and money spent on an affair. For the first time in weeks, I heard my own words out loud in a room where they weren't dismissed. Mr. Whitman didn't widen his eyes or make sympathetic noises. He did something better. He listened. I placed my folder on his desk and opened it. I slid over the receipts, the statements, the spreadsheet printouts, dates, totals, patterns. I watched his eyes move over the pages. He didn't rush. He didn't interrupt. When you've done accounting work for as long as I have, you can tell when someone truly understands what they're looking at. Mr. Whitman's face didn't change with shock. It changed with recognition, the way a doctor's face changes when he sees test results that explain everything. After a long moment, he leaned back and folded his hands. You've been very thorough, he said. I had to be, I replied. He nodded once. Yes, you did. I felt something loosen in my chest, just slightly. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was the first hint that I wasn't alone in this. He asked me a few careful questions. How long had we been married? What accounts were joint? What property was in whose name? When did I receive the inheritance? Had Kevin ever asked me to sign anything? Had I ever been told not to look at certain records? I answered calmly, but inside each question was like a nail being placed exactly where it belonged. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "Mrs. Bennett, you are not simply dealing with infidelity," he said. "You are dealing with the consequences of deception, financial deception, and that changes how we approach this." I swallowed. He told me he's going to take everything. Mr. Whitman's eyes met mine. Men who say that usually believe they control the story. Our job is to take the story away from him and replace it with evidence. I stared down at my own hands, then back up. "What do we do?" He stood and walked to a cabinet, pulled out a legal pad and wrote a few lines. His handwriting was precise. He sat again. "We do not rush," he said. "We do not announce what we know. If we do, he will hide what he can, and he will manufacture an explanation for what he can't hide." I thought of the way Kevin's eyes had darted to his phone, the way he'd kept it face down. I thought of how quickly he could shift his tone, charming, angry, wounded, whichever suited him. "What if he moves more money?" I asked. Mr. Whitman nodded, as if he'd expected that question. "He might. That's why we will file correctly and request disclosures, and we will be prepared for him to lie. He's already doing it in his own home. A courtroom won't change his habits." There was something both chilling and comforting about hearing it said so plainly. He continued, "Here's what I want you to understand. In court, people often believe the person who sounds the most confident, the one who speaks like he's in charge. Your husband is counting on that." I gave a small, humorless smile. "That sounds like him." Mr. Whitman did not smile back. "Confidence is not proof," he said, "but it can drown out proof if we let it." I took a breath. "So how do we stop it?" He tapped the folder gently with one finger. "We let him talk. We let him posture. We let him tell the judge what kind of husband he believes he is, and then we show what he has done." I felt my stomach tighten. "That sounds risky." "It can be," he admitted, "but it is often the cleanest way. A liar who thinks he's winning becomes careless. He overreaches. He insults. He makes claims that can't survive documents." I thought about the receipt tucked into his suit jacket pocket like it was nothing. I thought about Sophie's picture online, the bracelet displayed like a trophy. Careless. Yes. Mr. Whitman picked up one page, the condo paperwork, and held it slightly higher as if weighing it. "This is important," he said, "especially the source of funds. If your inheritance was used and we can document the path of that money, it strengthens your position considerably." "I can document it," I said. "I believe you," he replied, "but courts want more than belief. They want a trail that is easy to follow, even for someone who isn't trained to look at numbers. We will make it simple." He made a note on his pad. "I also want you to gather one more thing," he said. "What is it?" I asked. "Any correspondence that ties his claims to your reality," he said. "Texts where he said he was traveling for work on days we can show charges at hotels or restaurants, emails, calendar entries, anything that places his story beside the truth." I nodded slowly. That made sense. A timeline with 2 columns, what he said, what he did. Then Mr. Whitman said, "Mrs. Bennett, there's one more piece of this." I looked at him. "Your temperament," he said, "the way you carry yourself. You have been calm. That will serve you well, but it must be deliberate. He will try to provoke you. He will want you to look emotional so he can call you unstable." The word hit a nerve. I thought about the night Kevin had called me paranoid. "I can stay calm," I said. "I believe you can," Mr. Whitman replied, "but calm isn't just silence. Calm is control. It is letting him reveal himself while you remain steady." He leaned forward slightly. "There is a difference between being quiet because you are afraid and being quiet because you are prepared." I felt tears press behind my eyes then. Not the wild kind, not the kind that makes you lose yourself. The kind that comes when someone finally names what you've been doing. Prepared. I cleared my throat. What happens next? We file, he said. We request the disclosures. We prepare your evidence, and then we wait for him to do what he always does, underestimate you. I sat in that quiet office for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the building, feeling the weight of the folder on the desk between us. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a map. When I stood to leave, Mr. Whitman walked me to the door. Before I stepped out, he said, "One more thing, Mrs. Bennet." "Yes?" "Do not warn him," he said again, gentler this time. "And do not doubt yourself. You have already done the hardest part. You saw what was true." I nodded. He thinks I'm going to fold. Mr. Whitman's expression didn't change, but his voice held something firm. "Then let him think that," he said. "It will make the lesson clearer." I walked out into the afternoon light with my folder tucked under my arm, my hands steady on the steering wheel as I drove home. When Kevin greeted me that evening, he talked about his day and complained about someone at work. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man whose world was still perfectly arranged. I listened, nodded, and poured him a glass of water. And as he spoke, I thought of Mr. Whitman's words. Let him talk. Let him underestimate you. Because the truth was no longer just something I carried quietly in my chest. It was organized, it was documented, and it was waiting for the right room to be heard. The morning of the hearing, I woke before the alarm, the way you do when your body has been bracing itself all night. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. The sky was pale, thin, and undecided, like it couldn't choose between storm and sunshine. I made coffee and didn't drink much of it. I ate half a piece of toast and tasted nothing. Then I dressed in a simple navy suit, the kind of outfit that doesn't ask to be noticed but refuses to be dismissed. When you get older, you learn there are days when you have to show up as yourself, not as someone's wife, not as someone's supporting character. This was one of those days. Mr. Whitman met me at the courthouse steps. He was early, as always, and he carried a briefcase that looked like it had seen more truth than most people ever want to admit. He nodded at me, calm and steady. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennet," he said. I returned the nod. "Good morning." No dramatic pep talks, no promises, just that quiet understanding between two people who had done the work and now had to let it do what it was meant to do. Inside, the courthouse smelled like stone and old paper. Voices bounced off the high ceilings. Shoes clicked on marble. People moved through the hallways with that particular mixture of urgency and dread that only exists in places where life changes in a single afternoon. And there, near the courtroom doors, was Kevin. He looked as if he were headed to a business lunch instead of a hearing that would decide the shape of his future. His suit was tailored, his hair perfectly combed, his expression relaxed. He smiled when he saw me. An easy, confident smile that made my stomach turn because it was the same smile he used to charm people into believing him. Sophie stood beside him. She wore a light-colored dress that felt too bright for a courthouse, and she held herself with the same practiced poise I'd seen on her social media. She wasn't there by accident. She was there to be seen. Kevin leaned toward her and whispered something that made her laugh softly. Then he noticed Mr. Whitman and me, and his eyes narrowed with irritation, like we were interrupting his day. "Laura," he said, drawing out my name as if it belonged to him. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with this. I could have said 100 things. I could have told him about the receipt, the condo, the gambling. I could have told him I knew every lie he'd ever rapped in a smooth voice. But Mr. Whitman had taught me something important. The courtroom is not the place to argue. It's the place to prove. So I simply said, "I'm here." Kevin's smile turned sharp. "Good," he replied. "Then you can watch. Watch, like I was about to be punished." He glanced at Mr. Whitman and added, "Hope you told her how these things usually go." Mr. Whitman did not react. He offered Kevin the mildest, most polite look a man can offer someone who's standing on the edge of his own embarrassment. "I've told Mrs. Bennet what she needs to know," Mr. Whitman said. Kevin scoffed and turned away, already convinced the room belonged to him. When they called our case, we walked into the courtroom and took our places. The judge sat above us, expression neutral, eyes attentive in the way that tells you she has seen every kind of story people bring into that room. The court reporter adjusted her hands. A bailiff stood near the door. Everything felt formal, controlled, and oddly quiet, like the building itself insisted on order. Kevin's attorney began first. He spoke smoothly, with the kind of practiced tone that tries to make a lie sound like common sense. He painted Kevin as a hard-working husband, a provider, a man who had built the lifestyle we shared. He described me as someone who benefited from Kevin's success, someone who didn't truly contribute, someone who was now trying to take what she hadn't earned. I sat very still as he spoke. It wasn't that his words didn't hurt. They did. Even when you know the truth, it stings to have your life reduced to a convenient narrative. But I also knew something else. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the judge, and he was doing what Kevin had always done, trying to win with confidence. Kevin watched me while his attorney talked, waiting for my face to crack, waiting for tears, waiting for anger. Sophie sat behind him, posture perfect, lips pressed together as if she were the injured party. Then Kevin's attorney turned to him. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "you've been the primary earner during this marriage, correct?" "Yes," Kevin answered, voice strong. "And you've managed the household finances?" Kevin didn't even hesitate. "Absolutely." He said it like he was proud. "And your wife," the attorney continued, "has not been significantly involved in the management of assets." Kevin glanced in my direction with an almost indulgent expression. "Laura doesn't understand those things," he said. "She never has. I kept her from worrying." There it was, his favorite lie dressed up as protection. I heard a faint shift in the courtroom, the way the air changes when someone says something that sounds reasonable on the surface but carries something uglier underneath. Kevin's attorney nodded, satisfied. He asked about Kevin's stress, about marital difficulties, about growing apart. He never mentioned Sophie by name. He never mentioned the condo. He never mentioned gambling. He kept the story clean. When he finished, Kevin leaned back in his chair and looked at me like a man who had already collected his winnings. Then the judge turned to Mr. Whitman. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "you may proceed." Mr. Whitman stood slowly, not in a dramatic way, but in a deliberate one. He carried a folder to the podium and placed it down with quiet confidence, like he was setting a weight on a scale. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not complicated emotionally. It is complicated factually. And the facts matter." Kevin's expression tightened. Sophie's posture stiffened. Mr. Whitman turned slightly toward Kevin. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "you testified that you manage the household finances." Kevin lifted his chin. "I do. And you testified that your wife has little understanding of those finances." Kevin smiled faintly. "That's correct." Mr. Whitman nodded. "All right." He opened the folder and drew out a document. "Let's start with a property purchase," he said, voice steady. "A condominium acquired during the marriage." Kevin's smile faded just a fraction. Mr. Whitman held up a copy of the deed. The judge looked down as the document was handed forward. Kevin's attorney rose quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance?" "Overruled," the judge said, already reading. Mr. Whitman continued, "Mr. Bennett, do you recognize this address?" Kevin's mouth tightened. He began, then stopped. "It's an investment property." "An investment property," Mr. Whitman repeated, calm as a thermometer. "Interesting. Would you please tell the court where the funds for the down payment came from?" Kevin shifted in his seat. "My income," he said. Mr. Whitman did not argue. He simply reached into the folder and produced another document. "This is a bank statement," he said, showing an incoming deposit from an inheritance received by Mrs. Bennett. He paused just long enough for the word inheritance to land. Within days, those funds were transferred into an account Mr. Bennett controlled. Within weeks, they were used for the down payment on this condominium. Kevin's attorney stood again. Objection! Speculation! Mr. Whitman's eyes flicked toward him. It's not speculation, he said. It's a documented chain of transfers. The judge held up a hand. Counsel, sit down. Kevin's face changed. The confidence drained in small increments, the way water drains when a plug is pulled. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I had permission, he said. Mr. Whitman tilted his head slightly. Permission, he echoed. From your wife. Kevin glanced at me. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Calculation mixed with panic. He was trying to decide whether intimidation would work in front of a judge. Yes, Kevin said, voice louder. She knew. We discussed it. Mr. Whitman turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have no signed consent from Mrs. Bennett for the use of her inheritance funds for this purchase. What we do have are contemporaneous emails from Mr. Bennett telling Mrs. Bennett he would handle the paperwork because she had been through enough. He laid the email printout on the podium like a quiet accusation. Kevin's jaw clenched. Sophie's eyes darted toward Kevin's attorney, then back to Kevin like she was watching a lifeboat drift away. And now, Mr. Whitman said, we move to ongoing expenditures. He produced a series of statements. The judge's eyes moved steadily across them as they were placed before her. Restaurants, Mr. Whitman said, on dates when Mr. Bennett told Mrs. Bennett he was working late. Kevin swallowed. Hotels, Mr. Whitman continued, on nights when Mr. Bennett claimed to be traveling for business. Sophie's face tightened, a little color rising in her cheeks. And jewelry, Mr. Whitman said, in the amount of $5,000. Kevin's head snapped up. Mr. Whitman held up the receipt I had found on that rainy Tuesday, now copied and labeled like evidence in an audit. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Whitman asked, who was the recipient of this item? Kevin's voice came out too fast. It was a gift. A gift, Mr. Whitman said, still calm. For whom? Kevin glanced toward Sophie, then away. Before Kevin could answer, Mr. Whitman lifted another page, an image printed from social media. A photograph of a young woman's wrist, a bracelet sparkling under restaurant lighting, captioned with a cheerful little phrase about the best night ever. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly as she looked at it. The courtroom went very quiet. Kevin's attorney stood, flustered now. Your Honor, this is prejudicial. Sit down, the judge said, sharper this time. Mr. Whitman's voice did not change. This court is entitled to understand whether marital assets were dissipated, he said, and whether a spouse has been truthful. Kevin's confidence, the armor he'd worn like a second skin, began to crack in ways no one could pretend not to see. Then Mr. Whitman turned one last page. And finally, he said, we have evidence of repeated transfers to online betting platforms and payment processors associated with gambling activity, thousands of dollars over time. Kevin's face drained of color. It was the first time I saw him truly frightened, not of losing me, not of being embarrassed, but of losing his ability to control the narrative. The judge leaned back slightly, eyes sharp now, scanning the stack of documents in front of her. The courtroom felt different. The air felt heavier, more serious, as if the story Kevin had brought into that room had been replaced by something solid and unavoidable. After a long moment, the judge looked up. I'm going to take a brief recess, she said, voice measured. I want to review these materials carefully before we proceed. The gavel tapped once, soft, final. People began to stand. Chairs shifted. The room filled with murmurs. Kevin turned toward me, his expression no longer smug. His eyes were wide with a kind of disbelief, as if he couldn't understand how the quiet woman he'd dismissed had placed his life on the table in black and white. Sophie stood too, but she didn't look at me. She looked at Kevin like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, and not liking what she saw. Mr. Whitman leaned toward me and spoke quietly. Stay steady, he said. This is where people unravel. And as we stepped back into that courthouse hallway, where earlier Kevin had promised to take everything, I realized the promise was already breaking apart. The only question now was how much of Kevin would break with it. When the judge returned, the courtroom settled the way a room settles when everyone knows something final is about to be said. It wasn't perfectly silent. There were still small sounds, a cough, the creak of a chair, the soft scratch of a pen, but the feeling had changed. The air was no longer full of Kevin's confidence. It was full of consequence. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, posture straight, eyes forward. I could feel my heart beating, steady but strong, like a drum under the floorboards. Mr. Whitman sat beside me, calm as ever, his papers arranged neatly, as if this were just another day at the office. But I knew better. This was the day my life stopped being Kevin's story. The judge looked down at the documents in front of her, then up at Kevin. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "you testified that you have managed the finances of the marriage." "Yes, Your Honor," Kevin replied, but the edge had gone out of his voice. "And you testified that your wife did not understand those finances," the judge continued. Kevin shifted, glanced briefly at his attorney. "Yes." The judge's expression did not soften. "The records presented suggest otherwise," she said. "They suggest a pattern of concealment and misuse." Kevin's attorney rose slightly, as if to speak, but the judge held up a hand. "I have reviewed the documents," she said, and there was a weight to her words that made my stomach tighten. "The condominium purchase is of particular concern." Kevin swallowed. The judge tapped a page with one finger. "The initial funds can be traced from Mrs. Bennett's inheritance deposit to transfers into an account Mr. Bennett controlled," she said, "and then to payments associated with the property purchase. There is no written consent from Mrs. Bennett authorizing that use, and there is contemporaneous correspondence indicating Mr. Bennett took responsibility for the paperwork while Mrs. Bennett was grieving a loss." Kevin's face tightened, the muscles in his jaw working as if he were chewing something bitter. The judge looked directly at him. "That inheritance is not a slush fund," she said. "It is not something you are entitled to repurpose without clear agreement." Kevin's attorney tried to salvage control. "Your Honor, the marriage—" "Counsel," the judge interrupted, "the marriage does not give your client permission to deceive." It was the first time I saw Kevin flinch. The judge went on, voice even, but firm. "Additionally, the expenditures presented, restaurants, hotels, gifts, appear to be associated with an extramarital relationship," she said. "Whether the relationship is admitted or not is beside the point. The pattern is consistent with marital asset dissipation." Sophie's posture stiffened. Her eyes darted to Kevin, then away. She had the expression of someone realizing she'd been enjoying a lifestyle built on someone else's stolen future. "And the gambling activity," the judge added, "is extensive. Repeated transactions, significant amounts, and an escalation over time. That is a reckless depletion of shared resources." Kevin's lips parted as if he wanted to argue, but nothing came out that could compete with the stack of paper in front of the judge. The courtroom felt smaller. The walls felt closer. Not because the room had changed, but because Kevin's illusion had shrunk, and there wasn't much left to hide behind. Then the judge turned slightly, glancing at her notes. "Here is the court's ruling," she said. My breath caught. "The condominium is awarded to Mrs. Bennett," she said, "based on the traceable source of funds and the lack of credible evidence of mutual consent. It will be treated as Mrs. Bennett's separate property interest, and any attempt to characterize it otherwise is rejected." Kevin's head lifted sharply, his mouth opened. The judge held up her hand again. "You will not interrupt." Kevin closed his mouth, but his eyes were hard now, hard and panicked. The judge continued. "Regarding financial dissipation, the court orders that Mr. Bennett be held responsible for the expenditures associated with the affair and gambling, and that these amounts be accounted for in the division of marital assets." I felt something move through my chest, something like relief, but deeper, like vindication, like breathing after being underwater. Mr. Whitman's hand shifted slightly on the armrest, not a dramatic gesture, just a quiet signal that we had reached the point we'd prepared for. The judge continued through the rest, retirement accounts divided with adjustments, debts allocated, a clear accounting required. At one point, she looked at Kevin again and said, "You sought to present your wife as financially naive. The evidence suggests she has been the most honest party before this court." Kevin's face reddened. He glanced back at Sophie. Sophie was staring at the floor now, lips pressed tight, as if she could disappear by refusing to be seen. When the judge finished, she tapped her gavel once. "That is the order of the court," she said. And just like that, years of Kevin's control, his tone, his confidence, his threats, were reduced to something he could not charm his way out of, a decision on paper. As we gathered our things, Kevin stood quickly, chair scraping the floor. He turned toward me with a look that was part fury, part disbelief. "This isn't over," he hissed. I looked at him steadily. My voice came out calm, not because I was trying to be strong, but because strength was what remained when fear finally ran out. "It's over," I said. "You just didn't know it yet." Sophie stepped closer to Kevin's side, but it wasn't the triumphant stance she'd had in the hallway earlier. It was uncertain, wobbly. Outside the courtroom, the hallway lights looked harsh, and the marble floors felt colder than before. People moved past us, absorbed in their own cases, their own grief, their own private reckonings. Kevin's attorney pulled him aside, speaking in low, urgent tones. Kevin's hands were tight fists at his sides. Sophie hovered, trying to catch Kevin's eye like a child waiting to be reassured. But something had shifted between them. The spell was broken. When Kevin finally looked at Sophie, his expression wasn't loving. It was blaming. And Sophie, young, polished, confident Sophie, looked suddenly like what she was. Someone who had attached herself to a man she thought was powerful, only to find out his power was borrowed. I didn't linger to watch them fall apart. I had spent too many years watching Kevin take up space. I was done giving him my attention. Mr. Whitman walked beside me toward the exit. "You did well," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything dramatic," I replied. Mr. Whitman looked at me, and for the first time his mouth lifted in the faintest hint of a smile. "You did something better," he said. "You told the truth in a way the court could not ignore." Outside, the cold air hit my face like a clean slap. The sky had brightened. There was still winter in it, still sharpness, but there was light, too. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and let myself feel what I hadn't allowed myself to feel during the months of collecting evidence and preparing. I felt tired. I felt sad, in a distant way, for the marriage I'd once believed in. You don't mourn a betrayal. You mourn the version of the person you thought you married. But under that sadness, I felt something else. Freedom, not the loud kind, not the kind people post about. A quieter freedom, the kind you can breathe into your bones. Kevin came out a few minutes later, storming down the steps like a man escaping a fire. Sophie followed, struggling to keep up. "Kevin," she said, her voice strained, "what does this mean for us?" He didn't stop walking. He didn't slow down. He didn't even look back at her the way he used to. "It means you should stop talking," he snapped. Sophie froze, shocked. The bracelet on her wrist caught the sunlight, glittering like a joke that had gone too far. And there it was, the real ending of their best night ever. Not romance, not devotion, just a man who loved attention until the bill arrived. Later that week, the consequences kept rolling in the way consequences do when they've been delayed for years. Kevin's company began asking questions. Financial irregularities don't stay buried forever, especially when court records and disclosures start surfacing. His reputation, so carefully polished, began to show cracks. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he'd been placed on leave pending an internal review, that he was under scrutiny, that the same confidence he'd used to intimidate me was now being used against him in rooms he couldn't control. Meanwhile, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went home and sat in my own living room without feeling like I had to explain myself. I walked through the house and touched the backs of chairs, the edge of the counter, the window frame, small, ordinary things that suddenly felt like mine again. I made dinner and ate it slowly. I slept that night with the kind of rest that only comes when you're no longer waiting for someone else's footsteps to determine your peace. People ask sometimes, did you feel like you got revenge? I don't think revenge is what I wanted. I wanted fairness. I wanted my life returned to me, and I wanted the truth to matter. Kevin thought I was quiet because I was weak. He thought my calm meant I didn't understand. He thought love made me foolish. But here's what I've learned, and maybe someone listening needs to hear it. Quiet women aren't empty. We are observant. We are patient. We are the ones who remember. And when we finally stand up, we do it with evidence. If you're watching this, and you've felt dismissed, belittled, or trapped by someone who thinks you won't fight back, please remember, strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like planning. Sometimes it looks like protecting your future. Sometimes it looks like a folder of documents and a steady gaze. Thank you for spending this time with me. I truly wish you good health, peace of mind, and happiness in your home and family. If this story moved you, helped you, or reminded you that justice can still happen, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one.